We're moving on pretty fast to our next two guests who are going to share a very interesting story about the gap that exists between our intention and execution of inclusive design practices while working with marginalized communities. I would love to welcome Swar and Nikita on stage. They are the co-founders of Xeno Colab. And when I asked them about their first memory of service design, they shared that after being introduced to service design, they never could go back. And taking a stand means questioning when something is not working out for them. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Hi, Mark.
Hi, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. We're very excited to be a part of this conference and share this space with all of you. We're going to be talking about designing for inclusivity today. I'm Swar Raisinghani.
And I'm Nikita Gugri. Our preferred pronouns is she and her.
And both of us have been friends for more than 10 years now. So on the left here, you see an old embarrassing photo of ours from our college days. And on the right, you see a better photo of us presenting on stage for another conference in Stockholm. And we're really hoping that we can get back onto the stage and present like this again soon enough. So currently, both of us own and run Xeno Colab, which is a female-led service design and social innovation consultancy based in India. And over the past 4 years, we worked with multiple clients, right from startups to global leaders within the sectors of healthcare, fintech, or education, and helping them build products, services, and experiences. We also collaborate with global consultancies similar to ours, more as a local partner, to help them get a better perspective of emerging markets and specifically India.
But before we begin, we would like to give you a quick overview of the landscape of India. It is typically considered as a very complex and diverse market to decode and to design for. But having said that, there is a lot of growth opportunity here. With the rise of middle class, there are a great number of global companies now. They are moving their attention to this unsaturated and very rapidly growing market. And digital products and services are one of such really great, important areas where we have noticed rapid changes in the past few years. There is rise in the number of active internet users with smartphones, and internet has been made accessible across user segments. And now this has led to the rise of the next billion users, the NBUs, who are the first time internet users, who comes from the markets like India. Their interaction with their phone and digital services are so different and unique that it becomes very important for these companies to pay very special attention to their needs and their usage. And due to the increase in the number of internet users, smartphone devices, and also the consumption of digital data, the value of the core digital sectors are now expected to double from 2020 to 2025. And global giants like Google, Netflix, Amazon are now helping in the same direction. We have seen Netflix to have the plans to spend roughly $300 million on India-focused content. Google has recently announced their plans of investing around $10 billion under Google for India Digitization Fund, which is mainly focused on building better accessibility and information by building India-first products. And a few years back, Amazon announced Tatkal, which is an easy registration process that aims to help small and medium-sized businesses from India to set up their shop on Amazon just within an hour's time. And typically we get asked this question quite often, that how do you make sense of India as a market? Or how does one succeed here? And we feel that the key to understanding the market is to understand the diversity of the market. So when we want to explain someone who is visiting India for the first time, we would say that you can loosely compare it to the EU. like how each country in the EU has their own unique tradition, culture, language. So it's very similarly, even in India, each state has its own language, type of clothing, traditions, festivals, everything is different. But the diversity goes way beyond just these geographies. Because of the huge disparities between the socioeconomic status, education, and differences in religion and culture, the diversity in India has many layers to it.
So there's a different kind of intersectionality of diversity that exists here. So other than the diversity of age, gender, religion, or caste, there also exists diversity within access, within education, within socioeconomic segments, and also awareness, just to name a few, that need to be considered when we're trying to understand the diverse users in India. So what that really means on the ground is that if we were to conduct a project or research within a rural village that is in the same state that we are and only 60 kilometers away from our city, we would still need a local partner to help us understand the context and adopt a completely different approach to work in that context. So, but if a company or an individual was to make sense of the Indian language, they would probably start by categorizing it as urban and rural. So what that would mean is that you'd usually describe an urban Indian as a digital citizen, probably somebody who's fluent in English or well-versed with global trends. And on the other hand, somebody from rural India could be someone who might be less educated, can only speak the local language, and who might have no access to technology or might have low literacy of digital products. And these personas might seem logical or obvious at face value. But if we dig deeper, what we realize is that there exist unique nuances within these user personas and their behaviors, even if they belong from the same demographics, that make them completely different. And many times we end up excluding them while thinking of business offerings. So for example, there could be a seeker who lives in a tier 2 city in India, who comes from an economically constrained background and has limited access to digital infrastructure. And yet she's a seeker in terms of she wants to learn new things and wants to learn new technology or gain new knowledge and is an explorer that way. There could also be a progressive influencer who's from a rural part of India that is extremely different from the rooted Indian. She could be a progressive farmer who's interested in learning new farming techniques. And she could also be somebody who makes sure that she is spreading information and awareness within her own community. So what we mean to say is that it is complex if you're looking at diversity at its face value without investigating it further. And many times when companies work with these assumptions and biases that get in their way of actually understanding the different nuances of the diverse audience, we might miss out on these things. And today, the tech and the design industry is yet to be as inclusive as our true potential. So if we are being honest, are we really designing for people who have no access to electricity or earn less than $2 a day, or who cannot read or write in English? And why are we not designing solutions that meet their needs? So we need to ask ourselves, are we designing for the obvious users only because it's the convenient option, and therefore unintentionally excluding a part of our society?
So as service designers, we have the opportunity to become the catalyst for inclusion. We have to become more intentional about how our processes and the design solutions impact people without widening the gap of disparity. Even with our best intentions of inclusion, the reality, especially in the diverse markets like India, looks very different. So today we want to highlight the gaps that we have observed and want to share some of our learnings and hope that it pushes us to find solutions together and make sure that we are not excluding by design. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, you would see a photo of how we are having like a candid conversation with women during the research before pandemic. And on the right-hand side, you would see a photo of a woman who is talking to us on a video call during the pandemic, while her children ask her attention all the time. Since pandemic hit, all of us moved to digital tools very quickly. While we agree that they help us connect with people, we realize that it is not the most inclusive process when it came to connecting with rural Indian women. While working on a project around financial inclusion for women in rural India, we realized that even though our client wanted to build a digital product to make them financially independent, it was really difficult for us to include the women as part of the remote research process. This was because even though they owned a smartphone, they did not necessarily know how to use it. And so our digital tool failed to involve them in the process. So this unintentional exclusion that happens through our design takes us to our first lesson, which is we facilitating inclusion not always lead to the beneficiaries actually feeling included. We have observed a wide gap between our intentions of using our frameworks to facilitate inclusion for communities, but it do not always result into them actually feeling included. We miss to understand the deeper complexities of the environments and the social structure that we are designing for them. So we tried to reduce the gap from our side, but we were not all successful. After understanding that the use of digital tools was challenging for women from rural India, we decided to create something called buddy system to still make sure that they are part of the process. So in that buddy system, we assigned a tech savvy person from their household who were mostly men to help them use the digital products like Zoom for research. While this was done with an intention of including them in the process, we realized that we couldn't actually create the right environment for them to voice their honest opinions because they felt hesitant and overwhelmed by the presence of women in the same presence of men in the same room. So it becomes very crucial for us as service designers to think how can we create an environment that builds inclusion in an authentic way. Our intentions while creating the buddy system was to not exclude by design, or even we didn't just select a convenient sample of women who were decently comfortable with digital platforms. Still, we failed because of our lack of understanding of the other factors and the dynamics that play in their lives. So just having a seat at the table by design does not lead to their voices being heard or them truly feeling included.
And we can only build these environments for authentic inclusion by understanding the local context more deeply. Which brings us to our next lesson, which is limited local context leads to limited inclusion. Because from what we have learned, if we fail to build a thorough understanding of the local context and what diversity means in that context, we fail to practice inclusion. So to elaborate on this, we usually build an understanding of the local context by building local partnerships. And while we involve local partners, we don't really share ownership with them. And therefore, there is a gap that still exists between building local partnerships and us understanding the local context for inclusion. And although we realize the need to understand the history and socio-cultural dynamics of a place, what we also need to understand is that it is very difficult for us to authentically do that on our own. And we need to invite the local partners more into the process so that they can offer these local insights at every stage of the project. So for example, how do we understand who are we excluding with our choices of tools? Or who should we include to make our research or design process really inclusive? And how can we make our process or design more relevant for the local context? So usually these questions are either not asked or answered through our definition or lens of what diversity means, rather than relying more on the local partners to help us understand this better. So we've also worked with clients who really wanted to understand the diversity of India and wanted to ensure that we are working with all slices of society within the country, but wanted to do so by involving maybe 1 out of 10 within a participant sample from an underrepresented community or a religious minority community. So again, while we understand the constraints of timelines and budget on a project, it is very crucial for us to work with the local partners very closely to understand what is the best way to represent marginalized voices. Another example of where we fail to build inclusion because of our lack of understanding of local context is how we use language. So oftentimes, while working on digital products for India, a way to make a product inclusive is to translate the content to Hindi or a regional local language for non-English speaking audiences in India. But the truth is that if we dig deeper into how languages are used in the country, it is very complex. An exact translation of the content does not ensure building an understanding of the content. So for example, I might not understand the translation of a consent form or a contract in Hindi at all. So especially while designing digital products for a diverse audience in India, it is important to understand the nuances of this diversity. So the question that we ask ourselves and want to share with you all is how can we understand localized diversity to design for inclusion? And how can we understand diversity beyond our lens or definition of diversity? And how can we all do better to share ownership with local partners, or maybe find other ways to ensure that we are understanding diversity that is relevant to the context to truly design for inclusion?
But other than local partners, if we look at our own internal teams, we not always are equipped to build end-to-end inclusive processes. Do you think our processes sometimes end up becoming heavily dependent on the researchers or research outputs to achieve the goals of inclusion? And if it does, then it makes us wonder if inclusive research always translates into inclusive design. Also, most of the times, our teams have their own defined processes, which at times exist in silos, even if we aim for collaborative or iterative processes. But not all the teams are equipped equally to incorporate the inclusive thinking into their work and practice it. Do you think that the macro goals of inclusion of any project that we are working on is communicated well across all the teams who are involved in our process? And if there is a gap, then we need to address it. Because I'm sure all of you must have seen some or the other team in your office cribbing about how their work was not taken forward in the right way or the way they wanted once it was moved to the next phase or once it was taken forward by another team. So while working with an Indian e-commerce company, our goal was to provide an equal digital experience to the back-end staff as it is currently provided to the front-end customers. The research methods were really inclusive, which led us to creating a revised workflow that reflected the research insights really well. But when it came to executing the workflow, not all the teams were able to grasp the high-level intentions of the inclusion, but they had their own checklist of features that they wanted to include in the workflow. Since our service designers were involved in the process till the end, we were still able to keep the constant inclusive goal at the center, but that is not always possible or feasible. So what happens in those cases? How do we make sure that there is no loss of information or intention as we are moving forward? So this is how we like to question ourselves every time we are starting a new project, is that how can we make it a shared responsibility to achieve inclusion across teams and processes? And as a design community, we could pause and spend some time in thinking how can we make sure that all the processes that we use across the teams are aligned with a common goal, and we don't rely just on research to give all answers to inclusion.
So these were some of our lessons that we wanted to share with you all as we try our best to establish inclusive design practices. And the truth is that there exists a gap between our intention and our execution when it comes to building inclusion, and especially while working in India with its complex diversity. So these were only some of the things that we started to learn about in the past few years in our work experience. But with these lessons, there also come realizations that while our practice of facilitating inclusion might not translate to someone feeling included in the process, we have the capabilities of building an environment that can do that better or more effectively. We can listen better and more intently to the sound of the ground and trust our partners to give us a better understanding and a deeper understanding of the culture, history, and context of a place. To share the goals and responsibilities of inclusive design, we can design new processes that focus not just on the research practice, but also on other teams and phases of the project.
So we understand that these are really big directions for us to think and work towards. It is really important for us to accept and acknowledge that it is going to be difficult and a very long process for us to bring about all of these changes, and also question our own methods and approaches. While working on so many cross-functional teams and managing them, and also making sense of the new frameworks that keep getting launched every other day, it is still very important for us to not lose the perspective of our goals of achieving inclusion by design. We should look at it as a goal over time. It is very important for us to be very mindful, patient, and realistic in setting the goals of our projects. Just plugging in this approach at a very shallow level just because everyone is talking about it these days is not going to be effective. So today we want to leave you with an idea of slow inclusion, which needs us to be conscious in taking steps in reducing the gap between our intentions and execution a little bit more with every project. We should pause, question, and reflect at each point to see if we have moved forward at least an inch towards our goal. If we start considering ourselves as the catalyst of inclusion, then we should take the responsibility of this long-term approach to bring about a social change.
So we hope that this idea inspires us all to be mindful of how our practice and our work every day can influence how our solutions are including or excluding a segment of the population. So now we would love to hear from you all of what you think slow inclusion could mean for you or the design community, or how could we evolve the way that we work. So we really hope that you reach out to us with your ideas, and also if you want to hear more about some of the stories that we have shared today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and listening in. We look forward to the Q&A.
Big round of virtual applause for you. This was great, and I would love to learn more about slow inclusion. I think that's a very good and smart term to use. I haven't heard it before, so great talk. Thank you for all the examples, and we'll be back in a few minutes with a Q&A. Thank you, Swar and Nikita.